I'm not just a kid, I'm a wizard, baby. If I had a Facebook, you'd be adding me like crazy. I'm a wizard, baby. If I wasn't just...
The second book in R.L. Stine's Fear Street series is The Surprise Party, published in 1989. This time there was no republished version, so they avoided any weird attempts to keep it relevant. In contrast to the supernatural-themed New Girl, with its male protagonist and female antagonist, Surprise Party presents a fully mundane whodunit mystery, with a female protagonist and male antagonist. It broadens the setting with a look at the Fear Street woods, adjacent to the suburban street of the title, and introduces more of the students at the high school in relation to the characters seen in New Girl. I was pleasantly surprised to see that there is a bit of continuity with New Girl, with its protagonists Corey and Lisa featured as side characters in Surprise Party. Their whole adventure with a ghostly murderer isn't referenced, but we can see how their relationship has progressed since they got together at the end of New Girl. I think my criticism that Corey was too oblivious of Lisa's romantic interest was a common criticism that Stine received, because Corey's obliviousness is turned up to 11 to make him into comic relief. Lisa and Corey become a bickering couple routine, kind of like Frozone and Honey in The Incredibles.
We've been planning this dinner for 2 months!
The public is in danger!
My evening's in danger!
While this amused me, I kind of feel like Stine threw Corey away as an interesting character, and only worked with Lisa as the character capable of being interesting and contributing to the plot. And then he didn't do anything with that. She's a friend to the protagonist now, but she's mostly just a nagging girlfriend stereotype. The book centers on Meg, a standard teen girl, in the center of a group of friends, both male and female. There's Tony, Meg's boyfriend, an impoverished gas station attendant who jokes about killing squirrels. Yeah, nice guy. Shannon, the Molly Ringwald lookalike who's too insecure to see her own attractiveness. Dwayne, Shannon's gym rat boyfriend, who Meg either likes and finds cute, or dislikes and finds gross. There's a weird continuity error there. And Brian, Meg's weirdo cousin who's obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. Or Wizards and Dungeons. They used to have a mutual friend named Evan, Shannon's brother, who liked playing D&D with Dwayne, Tony, and Brian in a cave in the Fear Street woods, but who died there tragically after spending the night on a dare from an unknown person. We see this in the prologue as a snapshot of a male individual shooting him with a rifle, ecstatic about getting away with it. Evan's girlfriend Ellen moved away after his death and is now returning to Shadyside on a trip, so Meg suggests throwing Ellen a welcome home surprise party. Shannon and Tony are initially against it, finding the idea disrespectful, but Meg insists, and they eventually agree. Her friends spread the word to the rest of the school. Shortly thereafter, Meg gets a threatening phone call from someone whose gender she can't determine, telling her not to throw the party, with an implied, "or else." She calls Tony to tell him about it, and he tells her that he got the same call and couldn't tell if the caller was male or female. This would be a good source of tension if the prologue hadn't given away that the killer is male. I have to wonder if Stine wrote the prologue last, perhaps on an editor's insistence, and forgot that he set up the mystery of the antagonist's gender. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is what happened. Tony displays more intelligence than Corey by at least suggesting calling the police over it, but Meg thinks that that's an overreaction at this point. Why she never revises that assessment is anyone's guess. Stine didn't know what to do with that. Tony flirts with Meg, and his forwardness honestly gets a bit problematic while being portrayed as harmless teasing. He wants to come over, and she says no, and he suggests that no means yes. Yeah, that's not cute.
Remember, no means no.
Tony isn't all bad from a feminist perspective, though. It's indicated that he typically maintains a tough guy demeanor, but his stoicism broke when Evan died. He cried at the funeral in defiance of the male gender role, and has been emotional since then. Similar to Corey in New Girl complaining about wearing a girl's shirt, it exposes some of the unfair elements to traditional masculinity. The threats escalate. Someone rips up the party invitations. More directly threatening notes are left for Meg and Tony. They each observe someone stalking them, and Meg discovers her lunch bag filled with blood-colored paint. Yeah, I'm guessing Stine got a lot of complaints over that gruesome dead cat in New Girl. and went for a fake-out and surprise party. The threatening notes are also in red crayon, and I can imagine that before revision, that was red ink with the implication of being blood. Now Meg has good reason to be concerned, but instead of calling the police, she plays amateur detective and investigates her friends.
I've got 3 weeks of a journalism class, and I've seen all of Veronica Mars.
For a time, she suspects Ellen and Shannon, but again, we know it's a guy, so there's no tension. She ends up offending Shannon with her insinuations, and needs to get back into her good graces, goes to her house, and finds a strange gothic, almost shrine to Evan, with a huge portrait of him, but we know that it's not her, so tension blown. Seeing the portrait triggers a flashback where Meg remembers Evan getting into an argument with Tony over a billiards game, and then bizarrely advancing on him with a pool cue held as a sword. That is because Stine believes in the alarmist notion that playing Dungeons & Dragons makes you crazy, unable to distinguish fiction from reality. Or at least he suggests it as a thematic element, which is still annoying and irresponsible to promote.
There might be a loss of distinction between reality and fantasy, and possibly the loss of life in the process.
For a bit of context, in 1979, college student James Dallas Egbert III, a teenage child prodigy suffering from depression associated with being gay and in the closet, attempted suicide. When it failed, he hid out at a series of friends' houses, tried again, failed again, and eventually came forward. In his absence, the police were summoned to search for him, and his parents hired a private investigator named William Deere. Egbert was known to participate in Dungeons & Dragons LARPing sessions in a cave system under the school, and Deere speculated that he got lost or was injured when exploring the caves, which is a fine speculation, but the media just went nuts with it. The kind of people who are wont to think that anything that young people like is a problem twisted Deere's speculation into the suggestion that Dungeons & Dragons confused Egbert into thinking that the fantasy world was real, and then he got seriously hurt from it. Egbert contacted Deere, the search was called off, and Egbert successfully committed suicide a few months later. But the media didn't let go of the idea that playing Dungeons & Dragons makes you crazy and could get you killed. A year after Egbert's death, Rona Jaffe wrote Mazes and Monsters, a fictionalized account of Egbert's disappearance, depicting Dungeons & Dragons as a game that makes you crazy. Egbert's friends are portrayed similarly to teens who get into hardcore drugs, doing something dangerous to distract from problems in their lives. It served as a warning to parents about the new, dangerous things that teens were into, essentially making it the Tide Pod Dare of the early 80s.
Look, please just try one campaign with us.
Yeah. Really, good guys. Thanks.
Come on, Robin. And if you don't like it, if it's too much, you can always quit.
In 1982, it was dramatized into a TV movie starring Tom Hanks. That was only 7 years before Surprise Party came out. Since then, the Satanic Panic got underway. And it was really common to think that Dungeons & Dragons was a satanic cult that needed to be banned to protect the children. That is the context of Surprise Party, which suggests that Evan is similar to the popular conception of Egbert, as a D&D player who got confused and then died in a cave. Instead of suggesting that he injured himself, the book strongly puts forward that Bryant went crazy from playing Dungeons & Dragons and murdered him as the culmination of an in-game conflict. This is not responsible storytelling. It contributes to a harmful ideology that holds immersive fiction as dangerous, and is ultimately self-defeating because people who believe this kind of thing tend to try to ban horror fiction. When people think that fiction makes people crazy, they try to ban anything that could be violent and encourage people to be violent. Stine had to have known this. At the time this book came out, people were actively discussing legal restrictions against violent media, including movies, broadcast television, video games, and books, as a way to keep from inspiring criminals.
Don't you blame the movies! Movies don't create psychos! Movies make psychos more creative!
Drawing from the headlines is all well and good, but it must be rendered responsibly. You don't want to contribute to a harmful ideology that could actually have negative real-world consequences.
Try to do better than you are currently doing.
The stalker tries to run over Meg with a car, misses her, and then drives away. Now Meg seriously considers calling the police, and talks herself out of it, because she couldn't effectively describe the car. What? They could at least follow you to catch whoever makes advances on you again. They could conduct their own investigation. Not calling the police now is just as stupid as Corey in New Girl, no matter how much Stine tries to telegraph that Corey is uniquely stupid. There's a brief passage from the stalker's perspective, and I think this is where Stine originally intended to make it known that the stalker is male. At this point, the book puts forward reasons to suspect Brian, Tony, and Dwayne. Brian because he plays Dungeons and Dragons and might be crazy. Tony because he's prone to displays of bravado, and we only have his word that the stalker interacted with him. And Dwayne because he seems a bit apathetic, like he might be a psychopath. Tony and Brian go out to the cave to play Dungeons and Dragons, and presumably something like Mazes and Monsters happens because they don't come home. The parents are actually smart enough to call the police, and Meg leads them to the cave. She goes off on her own like someone who's never seen a horror movie before, and winds up being chased by the stalker, but doesn't get a good look at him. She stumbles across Brian, apparently injured after falling down a ravine, and Tony shows up soon after. The implication would be that Tony is the killer, but Brian complicates matters by raving like Dungeons and Dragons made him crazy. Meg takes them outside and has the opportunity to tell the cops about the whole thing, but refuses, even when one asks her why she's dirty.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
The next day, Brian scares her by talking about calling, not necessarily her, and feeling guilty, while raving about turning into a wizard and needing to reach a level at which he will be able to communicate with Evan across the veil. It seems like he's a totally nuts psycho killer, so Meg calls Tony and says that Brian concerned her with his guilty confession. And Tony doesn't listen to what she actually says. He freaks out about Brian betraying his secret that Tony is the killer. Dun dun dun. So Tony makes a date with Meg to meet him at a cliffside makeout point so that he can kill her. There's not a lot of nuance to his thought process. He's just kind of a generic teenage psycho killer, evocative of 1980s urban legends and slasher flicks. He's frantic and panicked and can't think straight, but he's a killer at heart. Dun dun dun. At this point, Meg confides in Shannon, who suggests that Meg call the police, and again, she dismisses the idea. Stupid, stupid girl! Before Meg's date with Tony, she goes with Shannon to a party thrown by Corey's friend David, in another nod to continuity, and there Dwayne tries to pressure Shannon into sex in a really creepy moment. Intentionally creepy, I might add, with him as an antagonist. Meg comes to her rescue by saying that Tony is there and needs to talk to Shannon, an example of girls looking out for each other, and how the threat of another guy is the only thing that influences the aggressive male, not the girl expressing disinterest. It's a decent feminist scene, lending respect to the troubles that girls face, and it notably stands in contrast to a scene in the second Animorphs book, suggesting that a girl uses superpowers irresponsibly by scaring away a potential rapist. It's also notable that the first girl-centered book of each series presents a sexual assault scenario, like this is the go-to dramatic device that girls would find relatable, which seems to me to be a tacit acknowledgement of rape culture. Anyway, Tony takes Meg to the makeout point to kill her, but before he gets into a good position to push her off the cliff, she clarifies what Brian said, and Tony reconsiders. He decides that Meg is too cute to kill, and that Brian and Ellen are his true enemies. So he comes up with a new plan, to shoot Brian and Ellen at the surprise party, which means that the surprise party needs to take place. So he's done trying to cancel it. This turns the makeout spot scene into a weird false climax, building tension and then not doing anything with it. Not even peaking with a secondary scare, just throwing away the whole scene in favor of the primary climax. I'm left wondering what the point of the scene even was. Meg and Shannon meet Ellen and have a fun time reminiscing about old times. Like when they used to play Eek a Mouse, which is an annoying stereotypical game where they compete to scream louder than each other over the premise that they see a mouse and can't handle it like the delicate women they are. Yeah, I would totally not react like that myself. Eek! They take Ellen to hang out in an abandoned house in the Fear Street woods, where they surprise her with the party. She's not just surprised, she's horrified, implicitly because she sees Tony. Things heat up when Brian crashes and announces that he's become a powerful wizard and can bring Evan back to life. He raises his arms and summons Evan from beyond the grave. Evan walks into the room as an animated corpse. No, wait, it's just Evan's half-brother Mike. This was sort of set up in a throwaway line about Shannon's half-brother who looks like Evan, and it pays off with a throwaway supernatural fake-out. I'm not sure how many people this is supposed to fool. It only takes up like a page and a half. It's enough for Tony to freak out, pull out a gun, and ramble a confession. Suddenly, the lights go out, and there's a gunshot. When the lights come on, Tony is shot, and Dwayne has the gun. Huh? What? Okay, convoluted plot twist time. It turns out that Tony isn't really a psycho killer, just that he fought with Evan in the woods. A gunshot went off, Evan hit his head and was knocked unconscious, and Tony thought he killed Evan, but didn't really. Ellen, Brian, and Dwayne showed up, saw, and decided to keep Tony's secret. However, Dwayne lingered, saw that Evan was alive, and killed him to get a chance to be with Ellen, which he's taking now by force, along with Meg for good measure. Now, I'm not a fan of the prologue, but to be fair, it does help set up the Dwayne twist a little bit. The prologue gives us the point of view of a cold, calculating, and ruthless killer. When we later get Tony's POV, he tells us he's the killer, but he's portrayed as frantic and impulsive. It's different from the prologue. The twist that Dwayne is the true killer, with Tony running around trying to cover up a murder he didn't even commit, isn't as out of nowhere as it could have been. Anyway, he takes Ellen and Meg into the basement. Meg finds an opening where she gets Ellen to scream, "Eek, a mouse!" When Dwayne is distracted, Meg hits him over the head with a frying pan. Who is she, Wilma Flintstone? Again, posing Dwayne as a sexual threat works well enough for an antagonist in a girl-focused narrative. The fact that the two girls can get out of it themselves makes it more progressive than not. However, I get the sense of Stine thinking, what is relevant to girls? Let's see. A rapey guy, screaming at seeing a mouse, and hitting a guy over the head with a frying pan. Okay, we're good. It's more stereotypical than it is respectful. I guess we should be glad they're girls, otherwise the distraction would be shouting penis as loud as possible. Dwayne lies in a pool of blood, and the implication is that Meg killed him. She leads Ellen upstairs, saying that someone at the party has to have called the police by now. Stupid, stupid girl. In the wrap-up, it's explained that Tony has been taken to a mental institution in New York, and Brian isn't crazy. He just suspected that Tony was the killer and thought that he'd put on a show with Mike to make him confess. Wait, so his plan was to pretend to be crazy and think he's a wizard in order to trick Tony into thinking that Brian really was a wizard? Isn't there an important missing step about convincing Tony that magic is real? Even if Brian isn't supposed to actually be driven crazy by playing Dungeons & Dragons, the narrative still problematically indicates that such a thing is possible, with Evan's behavior in the flashback, and no firm rejection of the idea that Dungeons & Dragons is dangerous. A better way to go about it would have been to not use Dungeons & Dragons at all, and instead make it about the strangeness of Fear Street, a setting that, again, isn't properly utilized in the plot. There are some descriptions of weird, scary happenings in the Fear Street woods, but it's atmosphere without consequence. Imagine if that setting actually meant something by making it seem like it drives people crazy. Maybe there's a rumor that the longer you spend in the woods, the stranger you get. Then Brian spends a lot of time in the woods, and it seems like he's going crazy. That could actually tie it to the magical Fear Street setting, without having any problematic Dungeons & Dragons makes you crazy stuff. Overall, the book is fun but not great. The whodunit is confusing, with bad editing leaving in contradicting details, and poor pacing. Its execution as a mystery is flawed. The reveal of the killer's gender in the prologue was a huge mistake, blowing a lot of tension. This could have been done creatively, like having a prologue from Tony's male perspective, to make us think that it's okay to ignore Shannon as a possibility, while she turns out to be the real villain instead of Dwayne, but it's just sloppy. As is Stine trying to write a girl-centric book. He does his best to try to render a standard girl's personality, but he has a common flaw as a straight author, not totally distancing himself from his own attraction to women when writing a female character. When she thinks about her female friends, she focuses on their attractive qualities in much more lavish detail than when thinking about her male friends, even the ones she's supposed to be into. So it feels like there's all this gay subtext, but I'm pretty sure it's just him not being very thorough with his characterization of a straight teen girl. You know what? Ellen's single. Meg helped her out of a major bind. I think it's reasonable to headcanon them getting together. I ship Meg Ellen. Melon. Next time, a ripoff of I Know What You Did Last Summer. You know, more than this book was.
I'm a wizard, baby. If I had a Facebook, you'd be adding me like crazy. I'm a wizard, baby. If I wasn't just in a book, the girls would be all over me.
Please like, share, subscribe, and consider donating to my Patreon. Pledges of $2 or more will earn you an explicit thank you at the end of each video. Thank you.